Now, 19 years ago today, a suicide bomber blew himself up in the Jerusalem branch of the pizza chain Sbarro, killing 15 people and wounding dozens of others. The bomber's accomplice, who picked the target and guided him there, was Tamimi, a 20-year-old Jordanian woman studying in the West Bank. Tamimi was arrested by Israel and sentenced to multiple life sentences, but she was released in the 2011 prison swap for hostage soldier Gilad Shalit and allowed to return to Jordan, where she has been celebrated as a hero. Now, among the victims of the Sbarro bombing was 15-year-old Malka Roth of Jerusalem, who held both American and Australian citizenship. Her parents, Arnold and Frimet Roth, are still seeking justice for her murder, with a campaign to get the U.S. to pressure Jordan into extraditing Tamimi so she can face charges of conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction against U.S. nationals. Those charges were issued by the Justice Department. Well, joining us now from Jerusalem are Arnold and Frimet Roth. Thank you for joining us. Arnold, Frimet, I know this is difficult, but could you just briefly give our viewers a little sense of who Malka, what kind of person she was?
She was an incredible teenager because she had qualities that you don't often see even in adults. She was very empathetic towards others, very sensitive, in particular towards children with disabilities. She not only felt these feelings, she acted on them, volunteered in many different settings to work with these children, to help parents who had children of that kind, and of course at home, because she had a sister. Her sister is now 25 and profoundly disabled. She helped me enormously and with great generosity.
Right. We certainly share with you in your loss. Now, as I mentioned, her killer Tamimi, who's still in Jordan, the U.S. did issue an indictment against her. What are you trying to do? What do you hope for from the U.S. in terms of somehow bringing her Tamimi to justice?
Greatly accelerated and enlarged pressure. The effort to get the United States to bring a prosecution in the first place was an effort that we initiated, and it stems from the fact that Malka, as you said, had American citizenship, as well as being, of course, an Israeli and being born in Australia, and she was an Australian citizen. Under American law, there is a provision that the United States can go after terrorists who commit a murder outside of the territorial United States. And to everyone's shock, when I say this, it had never once been applied in the case of Israel until I went to Washington and met with the FBI and the Department of Justice, and the process began. But it took years. It took 5 years until the criminal complaint, it's not an indictment, but it's very similar to, it was issued in 2017, along with a request that the Jordanians should extradite her. The Jordanians, within days, 6 days, engineered a court hearing in which they said the treaty, which had been in place since 1995 between the Clinton administration and King Hussein, was invalid from the day that it was brought into existence. So we're trying to get the United States to do what everyone knows they need to do, which is to tell Jordan, put her on the next plane.
Right. Now, of course, the United States gives over over $1.5 billion in aid to Jordan, so there is some room there for pressure. What do you hear from administration officials in for example, the current administration?
The current administration is really no different from the previous administration in these respects. In December of last year, 2019, the entire Congress, on a bipartisan basis, legislated a sanction which, while it doesn't mention Jordan, is all about Jordan. And it says that if you have a large slick of foreign aid coming to you from the United States, and Jordan is number 3 in the world, and if you have a treaty with the United States which you're breaching, the United States can hold back those payments. And the president signed that into law. The problem is that we haven't seen any sign that it's actually being implemented, and we're still hopeful that it will. But in Jordan, everybody understands that once we stop talking about dead children, which is an issue they're not at all interested in, and start talking about American funding to Jordan, which they are hysterically interested in, we've got their full attention.
Right. Now, of course, as I mentioned, Israel freed Tamimi in that controversial prisoner exchange for Gilad Shalit. Of course, it can't undo that decision. But what would you hope for or expect for Israel to do to help you in this campaign?
All we would like is for Israel not to be an obstacle to the efforts of the United States. That's all we need from Israel, because it's in the hands of the United States now. I would also emphasize that beyond an accomplice, she was actually the mastermind of this attack. She scouted the city center numerous times until she decided on a target where she was confident there would be the maximum number of women and children, religious ones, she specified. She boasted about this afterwards numerous times. She personally escorted the bomber. She gave him instructions on when to detonate. She was the mastermind.
Right. I know this is painful, but I have to ask, I mean, Jordan is often thought of as the more moderate Arab state, the one closest to Israel, but it's not as if Tamimi is keeping a low profile there. As I mentioned, she has been celebrated as a hero, as a celebrity, even there while living fairly openly in Jordan. I just want to get your response and your reaction to that. And have you made is there any sort of a direct attempt or through mediaries to the Jordanians?
So there's lots of efforts to engage with the Jordanians. They're not very effective and they're not very successful. And it's pretty clear to us that as a kingdom, the Jordanians have taken the strategy of just keeping quiet, pretending not to know about the case whenever it's raised, and hoping that there'll be a change of government. That's the sense that we have. The life that the woman has had in Jordan, where she was born, where she lived until very shortly before she came over here to do her university studies and to start the rest of her life, the career that she's had in Jordan has been simply phenomenal. Jordan is one of the most restrictive media environments in the world. You can't have a free newspaper. You can't express yourself freely. She, every Friday morning for 5 years, delivered her own TV program, recorded in Amman, beamed by satellite all over the world, filled with hatred, with incitement to terror, and with the praise of terrorists. Anybody who seriously contends that this is how a moderate country conducts itself is speaking a different language.
Right. I recall one, I think, chilling fact about the incident, which was even at the time of the bombing, she was appearing on Palestinian television as a newscaster and, in fact, reported on it on the very day in which she helped, of course, carried out or masterminded it. I have to ask you at this stage, how confident are you that your campaign is going to succeed? What do you think could change, either politically or geopolitically, so that the Jordanians will agree either to extradition or at least to take up the case seriously in some way?
Extradition is the only thing we're interested in, and what will change is when the Americans present a different kind of message. There's simply no other way to look at this. The Jordanians are utterly dependent on the United States, financially, military-wise, strategically, and economically, so that the balance of power here has always been absolutely clear. The United States has to be able to say, we want her extradited, and the Jordanians have to say which flight will serve your interests.
Right. The fact that she's, you mentioned that she's American and she also had Australian citizenship. I mean, how much support, either from the U.S., outside the government, and also from Australia, have you had, considering the fact that she had citizenship in both nations?
That's an excellent question. And the fact is that we're making an announcement in the next 48 hours. We have a lot of support in Australia. We have a lot of support in the United States. We have some support in the Congress. We want it to be bipartisan. We've certainly not been partisan ourselves. We don't have enough support yet. And we'll know when we have enough support, because that's when we'll see Tamimi in chains being led onto an aeroplane and flying across the Atlantic. But I have to say that we're grateful for all of the support that we've gotten from ordinary people, but we need more.
Right. Can you tell us about also, you mentioned that this is an anniversary, it's been 19 years. Is there something you could tell to our viewers if they want to, say, get involved or help you in any way? I'm
going to tell you about a petition. We would be very keen for people to sign on to the petition. It's at change.org/extradite Tamimi. That's one word. If people would sign on to that petition, they don't really know how helpful that will be. It will be tremendously helpful. As for the rest of it, if there are people from the United States watching, specifically the United States, call your congressman, call your senator, tell them that you're outraged by American inaction after so many years in this matter of Tamimi. It's not that the United States is lacking any legal resolution. The United States has done legally everything it needs to do. Everything now depends on explaining to the Jordanians where they are in this, what their obligations are, and there's simply no question about the legality of the treaty and the nature of their obligations. Right. The United States has to raise its voice substantially and say, we want her in our hands now.
Right, and I want to point out, Malki was only one of, I believe, 15 fatalities here. There were many other victims. One woman, I believe, has been in a vegetative state since being wounded in that bombing. But here, 19 years on, we should remember that Sbarro pizza bombing and, of course, honor the memory of your daughter, Malka Roth. Arnold and Frimet Roth, thank you for joining us on The Rundown.
Sure.
Thank you.